The Sado Estuary in Portugal, one of Europe's protected wetlands. It's a place of rare beauty, a place teeming with life, a place where man and nature live and compete in a delicate ecosystem and a complex balance of interests. Created in 1980, the Sado Nature Reserve is part of Natura 2000, the European network of protected areas. But along with an exceptional wealth of bird life and marine species, the reserve's 23,000 hectares also cover a number of urban areas. At the heart of the reserve, Setúbal boasts a burgeoning industrial economy, including paper, cement, chemicals and shipyards. The area also has fishing, aquaculture, rice and salt production. And with 70 kilometers of pristine beaches and a resident family of some 30 dolphins, the region is an increasingly popular destination for tourism. All of these activities interact and often rely on the stability of the wetlands.
As zonas úmidas são extremamente importantes porque elas são ricas em termos de biodiversidade.
These wetlands are very important because they're rich in biodiversity and they're among the most productive areas in the world. It's important to preserve them because they're spawning grounds for many species of fish. It's the first phase of their life cycle.
Once considered a health hazard, wetlands today are recognized as an invaluable asset. They prevent flooding. They regulate subterranean water levels, retain nutrients in the soil and prevent erosion. By providing these services, wetlands save the local economies a great deal of money. Even more important, they work as a natural filtration and purification system for the quality of our most precious resource, water.
Os estuários têm a sua própria capacidade de regeneração.
Wetlands have their own ability to regenerate. There are a lot of sources of pollution in the estuary. Some of them are under control, namely in this industrial belt surrounding the Sado River. The industries themselves have begun to make an effort to treat their waste. The urban centres have recently built their own wastewater treatment plants. But there are a lot of dispersed and unidentified sources of pollution.
For hundreds of years, the Sado Estuary was considered a disadvantaged region. To begin with, it was racked by malaria, a disease borne by the mosquitoes that thrived in the swamps and marshes. As recently as the 1950s, Alcácer do Sal, the second largest city in the region, was known as a major centre for malaria research. Today, it's known as the City of Storks. The return of the storks has not only made Alcácer a popular tourist destination, it's also a sign that the region's ecosystem has returned to health. But the local economy also depends on activities that are not always compatible with nature. The trick is to find the right balance between the needs of society and the needs of nature.
Todo o espaço europeu tem que ser corresponsável na preservação.
The whole European space has to share responsibility for the preservation of these wetlands. But we must also realize that to assume this responsibility, we have to be aware of two things. First, that man is part of the ecosystem of the wetlands. And second, that we have to reach an equilibrium that allows people to live in dignity, with access to social and economic development, just like in any other region.
Alcácer do Sal gets its name from the salt that once formed the basis of its economy. The salt pans are good for the local fauna, and especially the migratory birds that pass through the region. Because salt prices are low, many salt producers are turning to other activities that are not always compatible with the interests of the nature reserve.
Salt is a very cheap commodity. It hasn't followed the inflation of our times. You still sell salt at the same price you did 10 years ago. The price today is minimal. That's why the salt pans are being abandoned, and we've been searching for alternate activities.
While he still produces salt, about 2,000 tons last year, Venancio Bisha has done what many others in the business have done, turning over much of his land to rice production. But by replacing the salt pans, rice production takes away an important nesting and resting place for the birds that live and pass through the region. But there is another even more devastating problem.
Throughout the estuary, there are a lot of areas of rice where they use a lot of pesticides. Many of these pesticides are hard to control. It's hard to know which pesticides are being used. We found indications that some of these pesticides aren't legal to use for rice production, and they are being used, killing a lot of fish.
Rice farmers, for their part, argue that the nature reserve applies constraints that threaten their economic survival.
In my opinion, the farmers are being hurt by the sheer number of animals that live around the plantations. They destroy a lot of rice. It's up to the government, the state, to take a stand. It should tell people, don't produce rice here because we want to protect these animals. The state should buy the land or pay the people not to produce there.
Besides rice, other former salt producers have turned to aquaculture or fish farming. The shrimp and other natural nutrients in the salt pans allow for a high quality of production. But the organic matter produced by this activity can be a serious source of pollution. For this reason, the nature reserve has set a limit of 300 grams, or the equivalent of 1 fish per cubic meter of water.
Well, 1 fish per cubic meter is not economically profitable. We want 1 kilo. Since 1 kilo represents 3 fish per cubic meter, and we have vast areas, we can reach a solution. For many reasons, the reserve is important. But it's also important that humans have an important place within the reserve. From these two perspectives, with a bit of openness, common sense and equilibrium, ecology after all is equilibrium, we can reach an agreement.
To ensure a good balance between economy and ecology, the reserve is implementing an ambitious restoration project financed by the European Commission's LIFE programme. The goal? To restore the salt pans to economic viability and to raise awareness among local residents that what's good for the wetlands is good for them.
It's a community project to preserve the wetlands, which we're using to revive local salt production. It's a good example of how human presence can be compatible with the preservation of the natural habitat. It's an effort we're making under a 4-year program, from now until 2005, to restore the salt pans, so that people can resume work there, so they can derive economic benefit, because salt has an economic side, and at the same time, give the birds their natural habitat. The fact that there's a commitment from the European Commission is fundamental for guaranteeing the survival and perpetuation of these areas.
There does exist an activity in the region that's already economically beneficial and that doesn't necessarily pose a threat to nature: ecotourism. But here too, an intelligent and balanced approach is vital.
One thing that's extremely important, and that is one of the biggest threats, is the greed that pushes men to want to make a lot of money in very little time. This sometimes can degrade a region. For instance, mass tourism would be a total catastrophe for a place like this. The nature reserve serves to preserve the species that we have here. The natural species, but also man in his natural habitat. It's very important to keep this balance between preserving nature and preserving the customs of the society that lives here.
In short, what's needed is a new approach, a new way of thinking, one in which the needs of the local economy and the local ecology become one.